Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wiss, and I'm joined, as ever, by Jonathan Fadugba. How you doing, my friend? A bit of sensational news over in Sweden.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. We have a very interesting show for you today. And yes, there's no other place to start, but arguably the biggest news in Swedish football for over a decade, the signing of Marek Hamšík to IFK Göteborg. And that's going to be the first talking point of this week's show. We're then going to talk about Granada v Molde in the last 16 of the Europa League. Don't forget, that was a historic occasion there that we haven't spoken about since. So, we'll recap and preview that game. But where else can we start but the huge news that came out of Swedish football this week, the signing of Marek Hamšík, Napoli legend, to IFK Göteborg.
Yes, and I saw in the build-up to this, I saw a few rumours around on Twitter and things, and I'll be quite frank, I just laughed them off because I've seen this sort of thing before where like a kind of a big name is linked. It's usually someone a bit older, in fairness, who's past their sell-by date a bit, but reputation's still there. And I kind of laughed it off a bit, and then it was gathering more momentum and it got more serious. And then it's like, wow, this has actually happened. Marek Hamšík, I didn't even know he had been over in China at all. That just shows you how much I knew about him. So that's where he's basically coming across from, isn't it? But to move to IFK Göteborg, it's a sensational news. How on earth has this actually materialized, Jonathan, would you say?
Yeah, it's an incredible transfer. It's the biggest talking point in Swedish football for, you could argue, 2 decades. It's that big. There's discussions about, is this the biggest transfer in Allsvenskan history? And it's definitely up there in terms of reputation and prestige. It's going to elevate the league to a new level. As you mentioned rightly, when the rumors sort of started, it was very kind of, unbelievable, really. Didn't really think it could maybe potentially happen. As you mentioned correctly, Hamšík is now 33 years old. He's been playing in China, and anybody who's followed Chinese football of late will know that there's been a real shift in direction. The clubs have decided to narrow their investments. You'll remember, Steve, over the last sort of 5-10 years, or 5 years maybe, Chinese football, there's been huge investments bringing in players on huge money, which is partly why Marek Hamšík ended up in China in the first place. That's all changed now. The philosophy's completely changed. And that meant that Hamšík, as many other players in China, have kind of become surplus to requirements. So his contract was essentially ended there. And Hamšík himself, he's looking for a club to sort of play some football. He's not played football since September. I think it was his last appearance, September 2020. So it's a long time with no games. And he was looking for somewhere to play. He mentioned that he wants somewhere where he can play football before the European Championships. So that came about. So the whispers came about that he might move to Sweden, and he was maybe offered to a few clubs. And is IFK Göteborg, who we talked about on the last show, didn't we? We talked about how they're a sleeping giant, maybe, or how they've kind of fallen on hard times, but they're still a massive club, and they are the team that have landed him. Now, the mechanics of this transfer, it was reported and it came out in the last few days. He then eventually agreed terms with the club. He came in to sign, and when he arrived at Kamrat Garden, and he arrived at Landvetter Airport in Gothenburg Airport, a place I've frequented many a time in my life, and he was greeted by 90 fans who turned up with IFK flags and IFK masks and things like that, IFK scarves to greet him. The airport has actually got into a little bit of trouble with the Swedish police for kind of not exactly doing much to adhere to the social distancing rules, of course. But 90 fans turned up to greet Hamšík. He then, when he was escorted to the club's sort of location, the club's based in Kamrat Garden, fans turned up there with flares, waving flags and stuff at the stadium with these red flares. I think if you see on social media some of the scenes, it's like Hamšík described it as being back at Napoli. You got an incredible reception, which just shows you the potential of, and the sort of love in Sweden for football. And yeah, the transfer was done. It's not a huge amount of money. In fact, there's reports that he's not on a huge amount of money, to be honest. So the financials I don't think they're huge, but of course this will give him the chance. It's only a contract till August. It gives him the chance to come in, get some game time. The season obviously starts in a month's time. He can play, he can get some football under his belt, and then he can go to the European Championships, hopefully fresh and ready to go. So, it's a win-win situation for both teams. For both parties. For Hamšík, he gets some game time, he gets some football. For IFK, it's a huge transfer. It puts them back on the map. Whether or not it works out, it's not exactly been widely received and widely welcomed in all quarters. But the majority of the opinion is, this is a huge coup. And for the league itself, for Allsvenskan, I mean, when I saw the transfer break, IFK put a video on social media, and people who usually don't take any real interest in the league were tweeting about it and were sort of talking about it. So that just tells you this is a huge transfer for Allsvenskan, and it's going to be a lot of fun covering him in the season to come.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big deal. I mean, as you do, one of the first things I'd done, I had a look at his Football Manager profile. And you know what? His attributes are sensational. He could easily play for a Premier League club, I think. He's still only 33 years old. For those people who aren't aware of his best position, centre midfielder, attacking midfielder, very technically great player, but, I mean, all round, really. I mean, this is a guy who spent 12 seasons at Napoli. So, I mean, he's still only 33-year-old. He's not like he's over the hill. And I can tell you just said that they put IFK Göteborg back on the map. I can tell you with Nordic Bet, they are now the second favourites to win the Allsvenskan. I mean, you would have expected them down sort of in the mid-range table, probably about 5 or 6, 7 teams ahead of them. But now, they've moved to joint second favouritism along with actually Hammarby. 7-1 shot for those who are interested. I mean, could this one signing potentially make them basically a challenger for the league?
Short answer, in my opinion, no. I don't think one player comes in and wins in the league. There's teams that, don't forget, IFK were towards the bottom of the table last season, finished towards the bottom end, and only just managed to kind of get out of that trouble. But a few factors to bear in mind. Number one, they have European football this season. They've got the Conference League. So, of course, potentially that could help them in the bid to qualify for Europe. They're going to be in the qualifiers, and of course, having Marek Hamšík in your roster is only going to help you, isn't it? So I think from that point of view, they can look with confidence. Certainly, as you've mentioned, Steve, the profile of it is massive, and it's not just Hamšík that I think would probably have led to the shortening of the odds. IFK have made some big moves this window, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in the weeks to come, but they've also brought in a few other players. Kolbeinn Sigthorsson's coming from IFK, which is an interesting signing. He's never quite done it, but still a striker who has some repute. They've brought in Simon Tern from Norrköping, who was a big player for them. So they brought in Kalle Johansson as well. So there's some big names coming into IFK at this moment in time. And they don't stop there. There's other players that there's rumored to be signing, and maybe not quite confirmed yet, but there's a lot of talks of some top names coming in. So, he's been described by Pontus Wernbloom as world class. He is, as you mentioned, maybe could still do a job in the Premier League. Pontus Wernbloom said, "I knew he was good, but he has some incredible qualities, and that is exactly what we need." There's also talk of Marcus Berg and Oscar Wendt coming in. So, Marcus Berg is a big player, Swedish international. There's a lot of good vibes at IFK at the moment. Hamšík came in and said, "This reminds me of Napoli fans," the reception that he got. He said kind of he wants to kind of play football and win games. He's got a very good impression of his new teammates and the city, which of course I can vouch for. An incredible city to live in. So I think he's going to have fun there if he can deal with the weather. But I don't think it's going to necessarily make them title contenders. I think there's stronger teams. They've just been knocked out of the Swedish Cup. Of course, they were holders, but they've been knocked out. So they could only draw with GIF Sundsvall, and that basically contributed to their exit. So I don't think we can go too overboard. But certainly, if you look at where they finished last season, I think they can look to be finishing a lot higher this coming year.
I mean, what would you? I mean, this is a major boost for Swedish football in general, isn't it? We were talking throughout sort of last year on the podcast and the off season that it felt that Sweden was maybe a little bit flat compared to Norway, perhaps as well. In recent, the last couple of years, it's been more hyped around Norway than Sweden. So it's kind of a boost that Swedish football needed, perhaps. And there's not really anything I can think of comparable in the last decade, let's say. I think I was seeing on Twitter, Ben Wells was saying maybe Nicholas Bentner's signing for Rosenborg was big. There's probably the one sort of big move that can go down. I can't think of too many others at all that go anywhere close actually to Hamšík's move. So unbelievable boost for Swedish football. Can they kind of make the most of it?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, last season the IFK finished 12th. So, they were only 6 points above relegation qualified playoffs. That's way they were, look at the other, if you look at it the other way, they're only 6 points off 8th. So the 6 points wouldn't have taken them to 8th. So they're way off in terms of getting towards the challenger for the title. I mean they're good nearly 20 points, nearly 30 points behind the title winners. So is Marek Hamšík going to come in and make up 30 points? I'd be very surprised. And don't forget, he's only there on a contract till August, so who knows what will happen. And there's been some criticisms. Some people have said it's a short-term signing. There was a quote from someone in Sweden who's given an interview with the media and said that he believes it's a short-term signing and it can backfire. But you have to look at it from this point of view. Like you've just said, it's glamour. This is the biggest transfer probably in Sweden since Jari Litmanen to Malmö in 2005. You could argue. A player with a world-class reputation coming to Swedish football. It's not like someone, some of the other names, high-profile names that have come in recent years, they're nowhere near the level of a Marek Hamšík. This is huge from that point of view. Still a Napoli legend. He is completely loved in Serie A. Anyone who loves Serie A loves Hamšík. This is a player who's got 100 goals for Napoli. This is a player who broke Maradona's record, goal-scoring record at Napoli. Diego Maradona, the great Maradona, and Hamšík broke his record. So it's a huge player. He's won two Italian cups with Napoli, beating Juventus in the final. So he brings an undoubted quality and an undoubted prestige to the league. There's an interesting part of the finances here where, because of the European Championships, there's a sort of payoff pot, isn't there, where UEFA actually pay clubs whose players are involved in the European Championships. They pay them a proportion of their salary for a period of time, or a compensation figure. So ironically, IFK are going to get paid quite a bit of money from UEFA for Hamšík's participation in the European Championships at a time when their league will be suspended. I think there's a pause during that period of time anyway. So it's potentially also a shrewd bit of business for IFK. It's not going to bankrupt them in terms of finances. So I think it's a smart move from their sporting director, and it's one that could be very, very interesting. Now we'll see what happens in terms of where it takes them in the league. Certainly they've lost Kirishvili, for example. So the attacking midfield slot, I think he can slot in there and provide some creativity. I still think he's got enough to do a job in Sweden for sure. Still think he's got the quality. So yeah, it's a really, really exciting signing, I think. And he said he doesn't know a huge amount about Swedish football. He said it's new to him. He needs time to read up on the other teams. But he said, we will get ready for the new season. It's good for me to learn Swedish football. I've played Sweden before. They're always tough to meet, physical. But right now, I'm not thinking of the European Championships. I'm just thinking of playing for IFK Göteborg. And that is what he is going to do for the next 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible. I'm really kind of pleased for the club. I think they are a bit of a sleeping giant. And, I mentioned that there would be a great FM save for someone to do. And I think after the late next update in a couple of weeks, FM, when they do the winter transfers thing, then that is a great save for someone on Football Manager. Imagine managing Hamšík at IFK Göteborg. Pretty good thing. And we wish him well from the Nordic Football Podcast. And I think we're going to move on to the Europa League now with Molde. But anything you want to add before we conclude this on Hamšík?
No, that's it really. I think it's, as I said, it's a world-class signing in terms of reputation. I think my only hope is that fans can come into the stadiums And there has been talk this week actually about fans returning in small numbers from April. It's not official yet, but there is preliminary conversations taking place, maybe groups of up to 100, 250, possibly. My only hope is that IFK fans get to see him live in the stadium, because it would be a huge, huge shame if he doesn't get to play in front of fans. So, yeah, really, really excited, actually. That's given me a real enthusiasm, and I think anyone who's listening to this podcast should be very, very excited, because it's going to raise the profile of the league. It's going to obviously help us as a podcast. We're going to hopefully attract more people listening, and people will be wanting to know what he's up to. So, let's see how IFK will get on. And like you said, Steve, it's the sleeping giant. I think, as he said about Football Manager, it's definitely one of the saves you might want to, revive their fortunes. So, yeah, positive signs, exciting times, and let's see where it goes from here. And I think the only other last thing I'd say is, some people talk about him being maybe a bit over the hill or a bit old or short-termism, but you've got to look at what it brings to the league and brings to the club. It's going to put IFK, like I say, on the map. And in terms of being 33 years old, Hamšík's, I think, quite a young 33. I think he's still got a lot of football in him. I don't think he's necessarily like a finished player just looking for a last payday. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to Sweden. So from that point of view, I think it could be exciting times. I think if he's got the hunger and the determination that's carried him throughout his career, then it could be very, very exciting for everybody involved in Swedish football, except maybe Beko Häcken fan.
Yeah, and it's interesting that he's such a. Do you remember when Emil Heskey went to the A-League in Australia, and they actually had Heskey cam over there? They're gonna have to have like Hamšík cam, aren't they? In the suite in Allsvenskan there, but. And I agree with you. He's nowhere near over the hill. 33-year-old. Some players are getting past their peak at 33, but I think he's a young 33 as well. Loads left in his tank. It's not like he's 36, 37, really knocking on the retirement door. I think they're genuinely. This is a world-class player who's coming to Allsvenskan. So looking forward to seeing him in action, and it's a real fillip for the league.
100%. Let's move on now then. So the excitement keeps on going, because, we haven't had a podcast for a week or so, but we have had some huge, huge news in the meantime. And that is Molde. Molde pulling off the biggest upset in about 15 to 20 years in Scandinavian football in Europe by knocking out Hoffenheim. Steve, over to you. We're going to zigzag between the two leagues on this podcast, because there's big news coming out of both leagues. And we've got the Europa League last 16 tie against Granada taking place this week. So firstly, Steve, put into context the achievement of Molde knocking out Hoffenheim. Take us back to that result.
Yeah, I didn't give them a prayer, did I, in the second leg against Hoffenheim, but they performed magnificently. 2-0 victory. We've not actually talked since then, have we? I did a complete tweet commentary of the match on the NFP Twitter account. Follow us, by the way, at Nordic Footpod, if you haven't already. And Eirik Ullen Andersen scored both goals for Molde. The first was a really well-placed shot in the first half, and the second was right on the break at the death. So a 2-0 win for Molde, and on aggregate 5-3. So I couldn't believe they managed to beat Hoffenheim over two legs, and it's kind of crazy how they managed to do it, but they're there. Some heroes all over the field. I think the goalkeeper Andreas Linde was, for me, the main man over the two legs. He was absolutely sensational, but some guys that you wouldn't expect stepped up at the back, like Sheriff Sinian, for example, who I've given a bit of criticism to before. Bert Rees, who plays centre back when he's normally a left back, things like that. But they got into the hat, and I've got to be honest, I've never been so excited about a Europa League draw in quite some time. I guess you are kind of used to Europa League draws in recent times, Jonathan, but not so much myself. And I was genuinely excited, but I was a bit disappointed. It was a bit like a lead balloon when Granada got pulled out of the hat against Molde, especially as at that stage there were a couple of big dogs still available, including Man United. So how did you personally feel when Granada was the draw?
Yeah, it was disappointing because it would have been nice for, I think they had, AC Milan was a potential candidate, Spurs, Arsenal, Manchester United. So probably a bit deflating. But the other thing to bear in mind is Malmo were knocked out as well by Granada. So we've already seen Granada play. they weren't a hugely exciting team. And in that match, I'll be honest, they just got the job done. They were overall probably the better side against Malmo. So now it's up to Molde to sort of carry the fight for Scandinavian football. I don't expect it to be a hugely entertaining game necessarily, but Granada are quite a solid team. I think they probably will go into it as favourites. What's your outlook on the game itself, Steve? Do you see Molde having any chance? And is the game being played in some far-flung land, or is it going to be playing in Norway or what?
Yeah, I actually wrote a list out before the draw was made about what was the best sort of possibility for Molde, and of course you want one of the big star teams, don't you? And I actually wrote down Rangers was probably the best possible draw they could have got. Big team, but actually a winnable game, really, in some respects. But I think really, apart from the Ukrainian sides and maybe Olympiacos, the Granada's about as bad as it could have been. However, maybe it's a winnable tie, because immediately afterwards, I saw a few tweets coming in saying, they've got loads of suspensions for the first leg. And I'm just actually having a look at a preview here, and they've got 3 suspensions due to an accumulation of yellow cards. And in total, up to a dozen players could be out for Granada in this first leg, including Maxime Gonalon, ex-Lyon man. I've got to be honest, I don't really know much about Spanish football. I don't watch it. So I'm going to try and get some sort of expert on before the second leg so we can get a guest on about Granada. But they're not exactly the most high-profile club, are they? But
they've got some good players. I mean, let's take a quick look. I mean, they've got Kennedy, who's I think he's still on loan from Chelsea. He did quite well in the game against Molde, against Malmo, if I remember rightly. Roberto Soldado, of course, formerly of Tottenham. He's still there, a bit of a veteran. You mentioned Gonalon as well. Dimitri Fouquier, who used to be playing France. Jesus Vallejo is a player who has done quite well. I think former Real Madrid. They do have some quality. This is the first time these two teams will have ever met. So it's a new experience. Granada haven't been in this round before. So it's certainly going to be a landmark game for both. First encounter for Granada against the Norwegian opposition. So yeah, it's whatever happens, history is going to be made either one way or the other, isn't it? What's the shape of Molde going into it? Are they, because Hoffenheim had quite a few injuries as well, didn't it? So are the stars aligning here for Molde? Is there potential to get to the quarterfinals?
Well, the last match they had, Martin Björnbach was ruled out due to illness, and their big centre-half, Gregerson, was suspended. They're back. Really, the only 2 main injuries are long-term. Ola Brynildsen with a broken leg, and Christopher Haraldsson, who's been out with an ACL injury since June. And probably Uwe Umoy-Wanfo is ruled out, although he's maybe the possibility to return at some point over the 2 legs. So in terms of injuries and suspensions, they're in good shape. Obviously, one downside is they're just, they're not in any sort of, like Granada in the middle of their league season, towards the end of it. They're well match fit and things like that. Yes, they've got a lot of injuries. That's the downside for them. But Molde, the only 2 competitive matches they've had in the last 3 months has been, the Hoffenheim game. And due to Norwegian restrictions, which I'm going to talk about after this preview, then, not even really had a chance to do friendlies and things. So that is a problem. The first leg is going to be played in Spain, by the way, in Granada. The second leg is going to be in Hungary, the Puskás Arena. It seems to be the location that everyone's going to these days, like the informal place, isn't it, for these...
Mate, are you sure about, by the way, sorry to interrupt, but are you sure about that?
Well, that's what I read.
I'm looking at I think you're wrong, mate. The press kit says it's playing in Granada.
The first leg is in Granada, yes.
Yeah.
And the second leg is in Hungary.
Really?
Yeah, the second leg is going to be in Hungary. It was announced just a few days ago, unless it's changed again, which I can't believe. But
the press kit says it's played in Norway, but I could be wrong.
No, it will not be played in Norway due to the Norwegian restrictions.
Right.
So, yeah, it's going to be in Hungary. I think the Liverpool have been there against Leipzig twice. Spurs were there as well. Everyone seems to be heading to Hungary. It's like the place to be, isn't it, for these neutral sort of ties. But it will be the home leg for Molde's second time around. Whether or not that suits them, I don't know. I've got to be honest. I mean, I think Granada will win the first leg. They're in the top 10 in La Liga. They just beat Napoli over 2 legs. They do have a lot of injuries, though, so it's difficult to know without knowing them that well how much it will be in effect. I mean, I think over the 2 legs, Molde are going to be competitive. They're going to have their chances and moments. So, but they're going to have to be very clever. What they've got to do, what they were against Hoffenheim, they were very lucky to stay in the game. Like the first hour, they could have been blown out of the water. They have got to adapt very quickly. If Granada get off to a hot start, they've got to make the coach early moves. Got to make some tactical adjustments potentially quickly. Can't be lingering till half time if things are going bad. So they're going to be thrown into the deep end. I think on Thursday night, it's a question of how quickly they sort of adapt to the situation. Because I think the Spanish side they'll be very good technically, won't they? They're a good side, not to be underestimated at all. So tricky test for Molde, but why not? Over the 2 legs, they've got every chance.
Let's see what they can do. And just a few facts on Granada. They are one of the only teams to have made it. They're the only team to survive of the teams that are making their debut in the knockout phases of the Europa League. Antwerp, Hoffenheim, Leicester City, and Wolfsburg were the other teams making their debuts at this knockout stage, all eliminated in the round of 32. And I'll give you a bit of a quiz question here, Steve, before we move on. Molde are bidding to become the 5th different Norwegian club to reach a European quarter-final. Can you name the 4 other sides who have made it this far, quarter-final?
Oh, yes. Well, Rosenborg made the quarterfinals of the Champions League. Vålerenga actually made the quarterfinals of the Cup Winners' Cup. After that, I'm not really sure what I'm going to say. Let's think of a side that's maybe done well historically. I don't know, actually. I'm struggling. Maybe I've got a gut feeling someone like Lyn Oslo might have had a random run.
Bang on. You bang on.
Yeah, Lyn Oslo.
1968, 1969 European Cup Winners' Cup.
So one more team. It's got to be someone like historically big. Maybe like Viking or Lillestrøm.
Can I get your final answer?
Final answer is going to be Lillestrøm.
3 out of 4 ain't bad, my friend. 75%. The final one is Brann, 1996-97 UEFA Cup Winners' Cup quarter-finalists. None of these teams have made it to the semi-finals, so a huge night awaits Norwegian football. Molde Granada should be a very exciting game, certainly in terms of history. So we will see how that plays out. But let's move on, because we've got other things to talk about on this podcast. And we're going to move back to Sweden now, are we?
Yeah, we can move back, yeah.
Zigzagging across. We're going to discuss the Swedish Cup.
Yeah, the Swedish Cup. What's the latest goings on there, Jonathan? What stage are we at in that competition now?
Yeah, well, there's been some big games and some big results. And, of course, the holders, as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, are out. IFK Göteborg knocked out by virtue of failing to beat GIF Sundsvall. Norrköping advanced ahead of them, 7 points against IFK's 5. That was the only point that GIF Sundsvall picked up, by the way, in that group. They lost all the other 2 games, including to Sandvikens. But there's 1 or 2 upsets in this. I would say the biggest upset probably Degerfors. Degerfors have qualified, winning every single game. 6 goals scored, 1 goal conceded. They knocked out Elfsborg and Falkenberg as well, so that's quite a big shock. Otherwise, mainly most of the teams maybe was expected. So you've got Djurgården, BK Häcken, Degerfors, Östersunds, qualified ahead of Mjällby, which could be considered a bit of a turn up for the books. Norrköping, of course, as I mentioned, knocking out IFK Göteborg, finishing top of their group. Trelleborg as well, big shock there. Trelleborg in the 2nd division, Superettan, finishing above IK Sirius and Örebro. So that's quite a big upset as well. And then Hammarby finishing above OIK. So Hammarby made it through. And there was a really, really good game, Steve, this weekend just gone. Hammarby beating OIK 3-2. Now, this was a huge, obviously, Stockholm derby. No fans in that giant stadium with Hammarby's, of course, but nonetheless, a huge game. And there's a storyline there that could be one to watch for the coming season, because you'll remember my 10 to watch last season. There was a player in there by the name of Akun Kinmiamu.
Yes.
A young Nigerian who barely played a game, of course, so maybe I've gone a year early on this, but I will tell you one thing. He scored one of the best goals you will see in any game in Sweden this season. Guarantee it. Go on YouTube, Google Hammarby IAK, get yourself to go and look at that game, get on Wirescout, whatever you can do. I think they posted it on their Twitter account, Hammarby, as well, because this was Messi level from a move. Literally got the ball on his left foot, jinked in one way, jinked in another way, beat one man, cut into his left foot and curled it top corner after, I think, 20 minutes of that game. Unbelievable goal. Genuinely, I don't compare to Messi lightly, but it was Messi-esque. Now, this is a player who I did say last season I hadn't seen much of, but I'd had very, very good reports on from people I know. And if this is a bit of a sign of things to come, then he's going to be very interesting to watch for Hammarby fans. It was a brilliant goal. Rodic scored a great goal as well in the second half. And they held on eventually to win 3-2. I think Ludvigsson scored as well. And that obviously is always good getting one over their big rivals, AIK. So they've knocked them out of the Swedish Cup and they will go through to the quarterfinals.
So the quarter-final lineup, I can now reveal it is Norrköping against Häcken. That looks quite a tasty tie. Degerfors against Västerås. So a really big chance there for kind of a lesser team to make the semi-finals. Djurgården against Östersund is an interesting one. And then Hammarby against Trelleborg. Which of those ties catch your eye?
Yeah, I think all of them would be quite interesting. They're going to be played this weekend. I think obviously Norrköping will be interesting to see how Rickard Norling, how he's revitalizing his new Norrköping side. Going to be a very new look this season for them. So they're playing Beko Häcken, and that should obviously be a good game, evenly matched probably. Obviously Degerfors against Västerås is a bit of an outsider's bet for the semi-finals. Newly promoted Degerfors, who we'll talk about in the weeks to come. Then Djurgården Östersund, probably in Stockholm you'd expect Djurgården to see off Östersund there. Djurgården have been pretty solid so far in this pre-season. And then of course Hammarby will be favourites against Trelleborg at home. So I'd probably, I'm not afraid to stick my neck out on this one. Probably I would say that if we don't see Djurgården, Hammarby, Degerfors and maybe Häcken in the semi-finals, I'd be maybe quite surprised. But I think Norrköping have an outside chance as well of going through on home territory.
Incredible. You must be getting fed up with the splinters on the fence there. 4 outright predictions from you. Incredible. But I'll tell you what then, who's going to win the Swedish Cup?
Well, since you had you've inspired me with your 7-3 predictions from that Hoffenheim Molde game, maybe I've taken some inspiration from you. Who's going to win the cup? That's a bit more of a fence-sitting question. You know what? I'm gonna say it's Djurgården or Hammarby. So stick my neck out. If it's a Djurgården Hammarby final,
I don't know whether the semi-finals have already been predetermined or not.
No, they're not predetermined. No, I'm gonna stick my neck out and say I think Djurgården will probably win it, but I think Hammarby have got a good chance. If Akun Kimi does anything like he did in that game against AIK, then they could go all the way. Their squad's looking quite interesting, actually. They're developing quite well. They've got good balance, good blend. So I think but to be honest, Djurgården, they're looking like they mean business this season. So I'm going to tip Djurgården, let's say.
Interesting one. So you are right in saying that the three home teams, Hammarby, Djurgården, and Degerfors, they are strong favourites with the bookmakers, and there's plenty of pedigree left in this. I mean, Djurgården and Häcken, I think they won Swedish Cups in recent times, so the pedigree is certainly there. And in terms of the league itself, then we're heading towards the start of the Allsvenskan, about a month away. I mean, is that sort of confirmed? Is that the latest thing? And is there any sort of transfers that have caught the eye apart from Hamšík recently?
Yeah, of course. There's a lot of transfers going on, and let's not forget, of course, Malmö have been knocked out, which is a big surprise. And for the champions to go out in that group, I think was unexpected to say the least, really. So that they finished below Gais. They won 1 out of 3 games and lost 2. So pretty shocking to get knocked out to Västerås. But they've sort of made amends. Well, maybe made amends in the last few weeks. They've brought in a few names now. Of course, when we last spoke on the podcast, they hadn't brought in anyone. They've now made 1 or 2 signings. A forward called Antonio Kolak, who's coming from PAOK. Now he's coming and he's giving it the big Zlatan talk. He's come in and said he thinks he's going to have a bigger impact on the league than Marek Hamšík. So pretty big words, isn't it, from Antonio Kolak?
Big words indeed.
Certainly, obviously not afraid to to make an entrance. That's like a WWE character. But yeah, he's come into to Malmo, and they're still looking to bring in players. Jack Lane, I think, is an interesting signing for Beko Hacken. I think that's one that we'll keep an eye on. He's not really, since leaving Brøndby, his career has not really developed. I think he left too early, in my opinion, going to Amiens in France. Didn't really work out. Came back to Oiko on loan. That didn't really work out. Went to Örebro on loan. That didn't really work out. Still a young player. I question some of his career choices to date, Jack Lane, and I think the move to Beko Hacken is potentially a great move for him. Maybe get some playing time on that pitch, smaller stadium, maybe a bit less pressure. I think that's hopefully that can work out for him because he has got a lot of talent. So I don't want to go through every name, but there's quite a few transfers that have taken place. Those are some of them that have caught my eye. We've talked about already Lucas Forsberg, a big name coming back to Sweden, by the way, away from Marek Hamšík, is Nicolas Stefanelli. Now, I'm really, really happy to see him back at Oiko. They brought him back in from Chile. He's a player that I saw live. If you remember, we did a podcast about 2 or 3 years ago when Oiko beat Hacken 6-1 away. And Stefanelli was incredible in that game. And I never quite understood why he didn't quite make it at Oiko. It kind of went downhill from there, and then they kind of let him go off. And I never really understood why, because I remember saying on this podcast, he's a bit like a sort of Allsvenskan Aguero. I really thought he was a good finisher, instinctive box player. For a brief period of time in that season when Oiko won the league, and I think the year before it, he was a player I thought would really, really go on. And I don't really know exactly what happened there, but he's back, second chance and all that. So I'm really happy to see him back, and I'm interested to see how he does because I think he has got a lot of ability in him. So those are probably 3 names that have caught my eye. And of course, in the coming weeks, we'll be talking a lot more. We've got a season preview will be coming in the next few weeks with the season set to start in April. And for anyone who enjoys fantasy football, the Allsvenskan Fantasy is back as of tomorrow. So, get your pen and paper at the ready. And it's going to be a fun season, the Allsvenskan Fantasy. Let's see if you can avoid finishing bottom of the leagues this season, Steve.
I fully expect to be in contention towards the top of fantasy this year, but it's interesting you talk about the Jack Lane signing. I think most Amiens fans couldn't wait to see the back of him. Really, they don't rate him at all. I mean, he wasn't seen much, to be honest. He wasn't exactly given much of a chance there, but I think most of them were. I mean, there's a guy I used to talk to. He was actually the deputy mayor of Amiens. He was. Don't think he is anymore, but he was very excited about that deal when they got him. But it just never really worked out. And I must kind of point out it has finally happened. Kalmar have grabbed their Brazilian. And he's called Rafinha. So they've signed him. Sorry, no. They've lost the Brazilian. They've lost him. Rafinha.
You're getting carried away.
I saw a Brazilian. I got really excited. No way.
There will be. I'm pretty sure there will be some Brazilians. They've actually got rid of a few. Maxwell has gone to Recife, and 1 or 2 others. So as you said, Rafinha has gone out. So I don't know. Let's see with Kalmar. Maybe they're going to have a bit more of a sensible strategy this season. They've just actually sold one of their best players, Fidan Elite. He's gone to FC Zurich in Switzerland, which is, I think, it's an interesting move. Anyway, I think that Kalmar are looking to maybe, they brought in Jonathan Ring from Djurgården as well, which is not a bad signing. So who knows? Maybe Kalmar might avoid their minimum 3 Brazilians policy this season, but still a long way to go.
The shifting players, actually, Kalmar. They got rid of Maxwell, another Brazilian. They've got rid of Guy Andre Herm, who ex-Bundesliga player, of course. He's moved back to the Norwegian second tier with Asane. So, it looks like there's plenty of ins and outs for Kalmar recently. This sort of thing you expect from that club. And the league is going to be getting underway in roughly a month's time, I do believe, Jonathan, and potentially even with fans there.
Yeah, as I mentioned, there's been some discussions with the Swedish government and the public health and all that kind of thing about having some fans back. I really, really don't want it to be 2 seasons without fans. I think I'm quite tired of it all now. Don't get me wrong, obviously health and safety has to take priority, but I feel like as a society, like surely we've got to get a grip on this at some point. So I really, really hope we don't have to have another season without fans. I think even one season without fans in England it's borderline crippling clubs. I don't think people realise the extent to which this could cripple football. I think there's a lot of clubs who could go out of business quite soon, to be honest. And I'm talking big clubs, not necessarily even in England or, look at Barcelona, for example, they're bankrupt. So I think that football hasn't really had its day of reckoning yet with the finances that we're missing. And I just really hope we can get a grip on things and get some fans back in the stadiums. In terms of what's happening with COVID and that, as I mentioned at the top of the show, there are discussions now to maybe bring in at least sort of 250 fans. We'll see how that goes, of course. One sort of tidbit as well coming out of IFK Göteborg in terms of engagement from the Hamšík signing. They announced that they'd signed almost 500,000 kroners worth of annual passes. So the season ticket sales have rocketed. There was a quote from one of their I think commercial managers who said a lot of fans bought in advance of the speculation, but they said that we've only released 3,000 annual passes this year, and we currently have 700 left. So that tells you the real excitement to see Hamšík play. And of course, we just really, really hope that it can be allowed to do so, because when you've got stars like that in the league, people are going to want to see them. And I couldn't give me a moo, as I mentioned, we've got Joel Osoro at the Garden. We've got a lot of sort of big names joining the league. As I said, in terms of the latest, there's still ups and downs, really. It's hard to really get a clear idea on it. The state's epidemiologist, Anders Tegnell, has said that he thinks it's over-egging the pudding, basically. He thinks that maybe there won't be fans from 11th of April when the season starts. So it's really, really up in the air. He said today it is not inconceivable. We still have a high spread of infection that we need to keep down. It's really, really hard to tell, but no formal decisions been made by the government. And also, there's one thing to point out: Hammarby have had a recent spell of COVID cases, so there's been quite a few players I think have gone down with COVID. So, this scourge is not gone. We have to sort of obviously be careful, but I just really, really hope we can get some kind of clarity on it and get some kind of ability to have, even if it's just socially distanced, 1,000 fans. I think that should be manageable, really. But there's a lot of mixed messages, So we'll see where we go, and of course we've got to the 11th of April to make a decision.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that has not been the case in Norway. The initial first round was set to be on 5th of April, but unfortunately, some news came out today that it looks like we're going to be put back to May the 2nd now. Which is obviously a big blow, but not entirely unexpected. The country has a very strict sort of protocol on a bunch of things. They've not allowed any of the friendlies to go ahead this year, for example. And, it's just the way things are going. I would be very surprised if we do see any Eliteserien action before May, sadly. So very disappointing news, not entirely unexpected, but the Norwegian season looks very likely to be pushed back.
Yeah, well, I guess we can look at the positives. Last year we had to wait till June, didn't we, Steve? So maybe you've got an extra month in your pocket. But no, you're right. It's this is another reminder, isn't it, that this situation hasn't gone, and the worst case scenario would be two seasons without fans. I mean, I really worry, like I say, about the financial state of some of these clubs when we come out the other side of it. It's going to be touch and go whether some of them survive. It really, really is. So let's hope that we can find some sort of way forward, whether it's through vaccinations and that kind of thing, and maybe, like I say, just get even 1,000 fans, 500 to 1,000 fans in the stadiums, socially distanced, with masks and vaccines. Hopefully, can be managed. But in the meantime, I think that's probably about all we've got time for. Is there any big transfers in Norway that we should talk about this week?
Nothing in particular. No, there's not been a lot of deals, to be honest. I was updating some of my spreadsheets the last couple of days, and it's not been too many clubs that have had that many ins and outs yet. And I guess it's not a surprise we are in COVID times. If any deals that have gone through, generally been between Norwegian clubs, quite a few coming up from the second tier up into the Eliteserien. Probably I would say Lillestrøm look like the most active club, both in and out at this moment in time. And you kind of expect that sometimes promoted teams need that. But I would, if the start date of the season goes, into May, they're going to have to extend the transfer window for me. And, that will give teams a chance to do that. But I'm not sure, what the finances are like with some clubs. Can they afford to bring guys in? I think there'll be quite a few loan deals as well that will be made. And now we're a good, potentially, 2 months away, sadly. So, it's a real shame about that. But we've got to move on, and, we've just got to be positive and look forward to things. I was a bit critical today on Twitter about it, but there's no point going in hard because there's both sides of the coin to look at, isn't there? And we just got to look forward to football. If football comes on the 2nd of May, with maybe even with some fans, that's great.
Yeah, and you mentioned you wanted to do some team guides. Do you still want to do those, or do you want to save them now that the league's been delayed?
I think we can probably save them, but I will be looking to do some small team guides in the next. Now we've got 8 weeks to prepare. I'm probably do a couple of small team guides every week, maybe 5 minutes a piece, not in depth, but just to give listeners a chance to get their grips on the basics of each club. Maybe there's people listening who thinking, what club should I support here in Norway? And people like to support clubs for loads of different reasons, don't they? Some like the kit, some like the history, some like the location, or even the type of sort of players and fans that they've got. So that's what I'm going to be sort of doing over in the next few episodes, just giving, people a chance to know the teams a little bit better without going too in depth. Be nice and chilled sort of guides.
Yeah, we've got those to look forward to, and we will be bringing some fantasy guides as well. Don't forget to grab us on patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast. Now, for anyone who's wondering, we have been approached by some sponsors in the last few weeks. And our intention, Steve, I think you'll agree with me, is probably to try and keep it sponsor-free this season, as we always have with our adverts. But the financial realities could dictate otherwise. So if you do want to support us with the price of a pint, or the price of a Swedish pudding, or a Norwegian kipper or something, get on patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast, and you can support us financially to make sure that the pod is advert free. But we'll see how things go. Anything else before we wrap up? I think that's pretty much it. One thing I wanted to ask you, Steve, before we go, any movements around Buda Glimt? Has there been any sort of big signings or big departures that we should be aware of? Champions?
Well, big sort of news is surrounding Kasper Juncker, that he's linked with moves away from the club, but nothing's happened yet. They were linked with signing Lars Jørgen Salvesen from Strømsgodset, a big target man unit who did well last season. But unfortunately, he's now ruled out for the whole season with an ACL injury that he suffered in an internal training match. Bad news for Strømsgodset, but they do have Fred Friday on the roster who can get them some goals, hopefully. I just want one thing before I just want to give a shout out to Heskebo at Heskebo_ESN on Twitter, who has been doing some. He's now called Beginners Elite Series Pod. He's been doing some fantasy podcasts, and he did an episode with Neil Baxter, a friend of the podcast, this week, and well worth a listen. So I just want to give Heskebo a shout out here. These guys are really knowledgeable about fantasy football in general, and as if you're into that sort of thing, well worth giving them a listen.
Fantastic stuff. We'll leave it there. Hopefully, this has given you a nice little fix of Scandinavian football. We've got some big developments, haven't we? We've got a last 16 Europa League game, and we've got Marek Hamšík in the league. This, the fun gets more and more exciting. So, yeah, we'll be back obviously to review how Molde get on. We wish them the best of luck, because if they can make it, this far, then who knows where they can go from here. And if they did manage to get through, then they would have probably a really, really big tie in their hands. You can follow me on Twitter at JFFootball, JFFUTBOL, and you can follow Steve at MeatmanSoccer. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter at Nordic Footpod. So for now, hope you've had a great time. Hope you're getting through the off-season well. and fire any questions you want from the back of this podcast onto our Twitter, as I say, at Nordic Football. And we will be back soon to discuss all the latest goings on. I think, Steve, you've had a bit of a break from Finland this week, but who knows? We may well dip into Finland in the weeks to come. So from me, Jonathan Fadugba, and from Steve Wiss, thanks for listening, guys. Take care of yourself. Goodbye for this episode.
Yeah, goodbye, everyone. Take care and stay safe.